This is the fourth in a series of videos on bad therapy. That is, some things that therapists do on purpose, not by accident, that's actually harmful or damaging for therapy. Today I'll talk about supportive psychotherapy, what this means technically, and how much of the public, as well as many licensed therapists, misunderstand the term. I'm Dr. Stephen Reedboard. As a psychiatrist and psychiatric educator with eons of experience, I challenge misleading or oversimplified messages that you see everywhere on social media. If you like what I'm doing here, please like this video and subscribe to More Than Meds. Everyone knows what support means, right? That's somebody who encourages you, empathizes with you, validates your opinion. They're kind of your cheerleader. You know, you go girl, attaboy, you do you. Maybe somebody who says, I'd feel the same way you do in that situation, or I'd do the same as you in that situation. At the lowest level, support, quote unquote, is paying somebody to listen to you for an hour every week because nobody else will listen to you. The thing is, you don't need a therapist for any of that. That's what friends and family are for, or your temple or your church or other social supports that you have. They're the ones who are supposed to cheer you on and be enthusiastic and back you up. But what's that you say? You cut off your family? You don't have any friends? You just stay home all by yourself and get high and scroll through TikTok? So you replace normal, healthy human relationships with purchasing a paid professional to hear you out, who has no alternative but to listen to you, nod their head, and occasionally offer a relaxation exercise or a positive affirmation to make you feel better for a few minutes. Look, your psychotherapist should not be a substitute for friends and family. They shouldn't be the one person you talk to all week. They shouldn't be your social outlet. Instead, they should be working with you on why it's difficult for you to have social relationships outside of therapy, or whether you can repair that family rift that keeps you from getting support from your family, what stops you from making and keeping friends or hanging out with people, given that we're social animals and all. Or maybe whether the way you vent your gripes is a reason that people avoid you. Paying for a therapist's time doesn't mean you can use the time any way you want. Psychotherapists aren't babysitters. Therapy, quote unquote, has become a shorthand way of saying psychotherapy, but it's also cheapened the term such that it means almost anything these days. I talk about that in this video right here. But let's back up a bit. Psychotherapy is a treatment, and like other legitimate treatments like physical therapy or speech therapy or occupational therapy, psychotherapy aims to help a person with a problem, in this case, psychological or emotional. That starts with recognizing that you have a problem to work on, one that if you address it will help you end therapy at some point and go on to live a happier, better life. In other words, it's not to feel better in the therapy session. It's to feel better outside of and eventually without therapy sessions. Unbeknownst to many people, including a surprising number of licensed therapists, supportive psychotherapy has a technical meaning. It's a lot more specific than chit-chat or cheerleading. As you may know, psychotherapy started with Sigmund Freud and psychoanalysis over 100 years ago. And Freud was pretty ambitious. He said the goal of psychoanalysis was to result in structural change in the personality. That is, a lasting shift in the underlying organization of the person's personality structure. Those stable, often unconscious mental organizations that determine how we perceive and process and respond to the outside world. Structural change, as he understood it, was in contrast to symptomatic or surface level changes. Structural change was something that was really permanent, enduring, and would show up across all different facets of life. In contrast, the understanding for many years was that supportive psychotherapy did not lead to structural change. Instead, it was the process of helping patients use the most adaptive coping mechanisms or defense mechanisms that they already had access to. Now, to understand this, you need to understand that different coping mechanisms or defense mechanisms are more or less adaptive. One way to think of this is that some of these ways of dealing with stress and problematic feelings allow you to handle reality more than others. Let me give you 3 examples. First, a patient prone to psychosis, losing touch with reality entirely, may have a better hold on reality if they keep long, detailed lists, if they spend a lot of time writing things down. Now, if they didn't have that psychosis problem, we would look at writing things down over long periods of time as being a problem in itself. We might think that person had obsessive compulsive behavior, for example. But for a person battling psychosis, making lists, even for long periods of time, is better than feeling crazy. So in supportive psychotherapy, the therapist would encourage that person to turn to their coping mechanism of making lists as a way of feeling better overall, because that's the most adaptive coping mechanism that they have. Let's take another example. This time, the person has no psychosis and they're pretty high functioning, but they do have a lot of anxiety, and as a result, they make long lists and write things down all day as a way of trying to manage their anxiety. But every now and then, they can sort of look at themselves and kind of say that that's silly, and instead they can do a few brief relaxation exercises instead that helps to relieve their anxiety. In that case, supportive psychotherapy would encourage the person to make use of brief relaxation exercises so that they don't spend all their time making lists. For that person's situation, making the long lists was not the most adaptive coping mechanism they had. They had a better one. And so supportive psychotherapy would encourage that. And to take a third example, which is actually one I used in my last video, a person might be in denial about feelings that they have. And of course, being in denial means throwing away a lot of reality, not being able to handle the reality of the situation about having that feeling. If instead that person can consciously recognize that they have that feeling, but they use some humor to soften it so that it doesn't bother them as much, that's a more adaptive coping mechanism. And in supportive psychotherapy, the person might be encouraged to turn to humor as a way of managing their feelings. Notice that in none of those 3 examples was there any structural change. The person with psychosis still had psychosis or was still prone to it. The person with anxiety was still anxious. And the third person was still troubled by some kind of feelings that they couldn't deal with very well. But they were functioning better because they were using more adaptive coping mechanisms or defense mechanisms, we sometimes refer to those, that were facilitated or encouraged in supportive psychotherapy. There's a slight wrinkle to this story that I have to mention. There's a famous study called the Psychotherapy Research Project of the Menninger Clinic that followed 42 patients, subjects, through psychotherapy and for long-term follow-up, up to 30 years in some cases. It found that even supportive psychotherapy, like I've just been describing, can also lead to structural change over long periods of time. This was an unexpected finding, but the main point for our purposes is that supportive psychotherapy is not just chit-chat or cheerleading or encouraging the patient or client. It's someone who helps you be your best self. Now, as an untrained patient or client, It's really not your job to know all this. It's the job of the licensed professional, the professional psychotherapist, the person you're seeing and paying. It's their obligation to take their job seriously and to think carefully about what it is they're doing, which is actually therapeutic. Remember the old saying, give a man a fish and he eats for a day, teach him to fish and he eats for a lifetime? Well, our job as psychotherapists is not to hand out fish. It's to help people fish for themselves for the rest of their lives. That's true even when we're being supportive. We're not aiming for structural change in the deep areas of personality, but instead we do want to leave the person with adaptive changes in the way they deal with the world. In summary, cheerleading and validation, what a lot of people, including therapists out there, think of as supportive, isn't really psychotherapy at all. That's what friends and family should do. Helping clients use their best coping skills or giving clients tips, tools, and strategies for how to manage their emotions and their interpersonal relationships. Technically speaking, that's what supportive psychotherapy is. It's not leading to any fundamental change in the personality, but it's giving people better ways of managing with the personality they have. And really, I have nothing against that. It's perfectly fine to offer that and also to seek it out as a client if you either don't want to explore things more deeply or if it's not possible for various reasons. Whereas working for structural change, an actual shift in the personality, which, by the way, can be very subtle. We're not talking about getting a whole new personality here. Very small shifts in personality can lead to very big changes in a person's life going forward. But that's the domain of depth psychotherapy, which is an umbrella term. Not everybody's familiar with it, but depth psychotherapy includes psychoanalysis, psychodynamic psychotherapy, which is what I practice in my office, Gestalt therapy, existential humanistic therapy, and other schools that aim to look beneath the surface and try to figure out what's going on at the root of a person's problems. If the 5-syllable psychotherapy is too long, then okay, call it therapy, 3 syllables. But don't let that casual word make the practice casual too. Careful thought over the past century has gone into what psychotherapy is and how it helps. If it's chit-chat or just a dry report about what happened that week, or it's just emotional venting, that's not psychotherapy. If it's just paying someone so they'll listen and nod their head, that's not psychotherapy. Psychotherapy, even supportive psychotherapy, is a treatment. Please comment on supportive psychotherapy and let me know in the comments if there's other things that you can suggest that therapists do that are bad. Maybe I'll put them in a future video. Please like this video, but only if you really like it. Please subscribe if you have not already. And this video is part of a playlist, a series I'm doing on bad therapy and bad therapists, and there's the playlist. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.